Okay, welcome everybody to our February roundtable on exhibit labels and panels. We're excited to have you here today. Again, it's a roundtable, so this is an open chat and interaction. So we're hoping, especially today, to talk about some practical things for folks who are looking to create labels and panels, especially for exhibits, alongside some of the more of ideas or themes or things that we could do with that as well. So again, I'm going to be starting to use an app called Mentimeter, which is a collaboration app. So I'm just going to load that in and it will take a moment. All right. And so what you should hopefully see is a presentation. And then again, there's a couple of ways you can collaborate directly with Mentimeter in Zoom, and it should give you that option so you can choose to or not. You can also collaborate separately using like a cell phone or a lap or another like tablet or something if you don't want to do it directly on your screen. And you would go to menti.com and use the code that's at the top of the slide to do the collaboration there. So this will be a mix of general slides as well as some interactive ones. So if you do want to interact directly with the slides, you'll want to be in collaboration mode. If you don't, or if you're not comfortable with it or you can't based on what you're using for a computer, we certainly welcome you to put and share your information in the chat as well. All right. One more person. So today, I called it labels and channels in the information session. Today, I'm calling it labels and design. Kind of very similar theme for what we're going for today. And we're going to hopefully talk a little bit about some best practices. Again, we're going to be doing through these group activities, interactive slides.
This was mine or that?
Again, obviously, kind of that open share opportunity for us to talk about what we're doing. And again, as I said before, hopefully a lot of practical information. I know that's always a big question for folks. Sort of how do you do your labels? Where do you get them printed? What do you print them on, et cetera, and that kind of stuff. And again, because I am doing a slide share, it's a little difficult for me to see everybody. So if you do have a question or want to make a comment, you can use the raise hand.
Thank you.
Zoom, or put something in the chat. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about labels. We talked about themes and storytelling last time. So I'm not going to talk a lot about kind of label content specifically, more about kind of the function of them and kind of things to think about and remember when doing your labels. But I found this quote, and I think this is an interesting one. Since the beginning of museums, exhibit labels have been used as instruments of torture on helpless visitors. And I think this is kind of a reflection on, I might say, sort of traditional or semi-traditional labels that are maybe a little bit long, a little bit difficult to parse, a little bit overwhelming in some ways. And so I think sort of wanting to think about labels as really being the meat of your story and the content and the way in which you get the information you want across while making it a pleasant experience for your visitor or your reader. So, the label content. So again, this aspect of, we talked about before, telling a story and really sort of getting to something where you have beginning, middle, and end. You have a way to have a conversation with it in a way to engage that is different from just giving facts and figures. My sort of point that I always like to make, and I think this kind of comes back to that quote before, an exhibit is not a book. This is not where you put every single piece of information that you have available on the wall. You have to work to condense, to get to the essentials, and find ways to tell more information or offer more information sort of in an alternate way. That may be because you have a book that goes along with an exhibit. It could be that you have the information online. It could be that you use QR codes and help people get more into details that they might be interested in without having it to be right in front of them. And then I think last thing is sort of the two most important pieces when you're actually thinking again practically about your labels is both legibility and readability. So legibility is the actual physical ability to read something. So, and that can be, we'll talk a little bit about things like font size, font types, contrast, that sort of thing. And readability, which is the level of language or the type of language that you're using in your labels themselves. And so trying to work towards labels that can be read by a wide group of people, or most especially by the audience that you've identified, so that they are not both too dense or too high a grade reading level. But they also don't do things like have assumptions of knowledge that your audience might not have or know about, so that you're trying to think about the the largest group of folks are able to understand the content you're putting out there, and that's readability. So here's our first joint activity together. We have 4 labels here, and there's going to be a second slide where you actually vote on which ones you like best. So the text itself, the information itself is the same on all of them, but I've kind of varied both the type of font, the sizing, and the color, as you'll see. And so take a quick second to look at those. And then I'm going to move to the next slide when you can vote on which one you like best and which one do you like worst. And again, this is also something where alongside voting, you can also put some information in the chat, especially as it relates to why you're making the choices you are about which one you like best or which one you like worst. And there's no right answer to this per se. They're just some different ways of doing this. All right, so I'm going to move to the next slide. The labels will still be there. They'll be a bit smaller, but you'll be able to see them. And this is where you'll be able to rate your labels from best, which would be first or worst. And what you can do, you should be able to like drag the labels up and down, I believe is how it functions. To kind of drag which label you want to the first, which label you want to the second, etc.
I think you can just hit join. I don't think we have to.
I can't label.
All right. All right, so far we've got label 1 in first place, label 4 in second, label 2 in third. I probably should have named them A, B, and C, and D to not confuse myself. And label 3 in fourth place. Oh, we're switching up a little bit. Label 2 and label 4. So yeah, anyone who has voted or is voting, any reason why you're choosing, again, label 1 or 2, or you're not choosing label 3
Well,
that you want to share?
probably 2 or 4.
2 from Pat. Excellent.
I thought you got it.
So we just continue voting. I'll just sort of say what the differences are in these labels specifically. So label 1 is using a serif font. So there's usually labels are defined generally by serif or sans serif or sans serif, which basically just means whether they have little curly cues at sort of the top and the bottom of the font, or if they don't, if they're a bit more plain. Yeah, and so Susanna's talking about serifs would be harder to read for some. So serifs can be a little bit more difficult. And it depends a little bit on both the serif font and the size. So label 2 is a sans serif or sans serif font. So again, you can see that little bit of the difference in the sort of the curl on that. Label 3 is the same sans serif font, but with a dark background instead of the white background, which just sort of showcases how contrast also plays sort of a way in this. And then label 4 is again same sans serif, but without bolding the title of the object itself. So looks like we're label 2 and label 1 are pretty close, but label 2 is winning at the moment. And again, label 3 I would guess unsurprisingly is our least favorite one. Label three had white lettering. Excellent comment, Karina. So yes, so there are ways if you want to use a dark background that you can then use instead of using a dark font, you use a white font or a light font. And there's another exhibit worksheet that goes with this roundtable that's available on our website, and I'll put a link to it later as well that talks about some of the resources that you can do to look for this kind of thing. So there's font lists. There's also what we call contrast checkers that you can do online. So if you're interested in using some more color in like either the background of your labels or panels or in your exhibit itself, you can check to make sure that the contrast between the background color and the font color is readable enough for most accessibility. So yeah, Laura, serif fonts for large quantities of text, but with newspaper, excellent. Yep. So yeah, so a lot of this again is something that I would encourage you to sort of play around with, and again think of, and we'll talk a little bit about this. Um, the purpose of the label, the size of the font, the size of the label itself. Fonts label two, label one. I have to go back and look. Label one might be Garamond. Label two, I think, is Helvetica. I think that's the sans serif that I used, but I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to go back and look at it. So the next kind of interactive label I have for you is this label about the settlers of central Illinois. Um, and I'm going to, again, this next slide is going to be the interactive slide. But what about this label do you kind of like or not like? And kind of why?
Needs more white space.
Yeah, and so you can certainly, again, feel free to write it in there in the chat. So needs more white space. So there was a lot of text there, right? In kind of a small area. Too much text. Yep. Yeah. Too much text. So we want to get rid of some text. Bullet out main points, less text. Yeah. So ways to break up the text for readability. Again, that aspect of how can we get the main information out, or how can we better, instead of putting it all in one big block, make it sort of go with different sort of sections more, extra returns between paragraphs rather than indents. Yes, giving a bit more white space as well. Bullet points. Yeah. Multiple signs. There you go. Yeah. So there's obviously, again, you're thinking about there's too much text, right? But what if that text you want let's say you want every single word in that text. You're like, no, this is all essential text. Um, so it's not just about necessarily the number of words, but then it's the way that you present that number of words. So yeah, how could you make that amount of text easier to read? You can use your spacing between paragraphs instead of indents. You can put it on different signs. You could change it to some audio. Nice. Yeah, so use it in a different way instead of just being text or reading. Yeah. Blah. Yeah, label or painting. Like it's not a very dynamic label, right? Like there's no visuals. Oh, add photos. Look at that. Just gonna say that. Right? You could potentially add some visuals in with it to help both again break up the text, but also sort of reinforce what you're saying in the text. That's a wonderful way to make something more dynamic or interesting to look at. Great. Yeah, David, break out text into what is this? Interested. Important info in bold. Yep. Great. Yeah, so hopefully this kind of gets to both of these kind of interactive signs, um, get to a little bit of the points about kind of legibility and readability, especially, and sort of how that's a really important function of not only the content that we put in there, but the way in which we show the content is just as essential, so that we can make sure that we're doing not doing ourselves a disservice by creating content that's uh, not something somebody wants to stop and read. Yeah, QR codes are great. QR codes are a really interesting case. QR codes came out however many years ago, and they barely got used, and people were like, "Pshaw, QR codes," and they have made a comeback, and now you see them practically everywhere, and people use them. I think that that is another great way of layering. One of the considerations you want to take into account when using things like QR code or technology in your exhibits is again thinking about who your audience is, and how comfortable they are with using that type of technology. Again, I think we're more generally open to that these days, but it's still something to consider when you're thinking about, oh, this is an exhibit for fourth graders. Well, I don't say hopefully all of your fourth graders don't run around with their smartphones in their pockets. They might. But so a QR code might not be the best thing for that audience, but there might be other ways where you can use a website, or a link, or even have an actual iPad there for them to explore on, because that they will certainly know how to use. Yep, free QR codes. Yeah. And there's different ones you can use, different services. A lot of like Google has a QR code generator, I believe now, that's fully free. So you can definitely find ones out there. Okay. Any questions about sort of before I move on, or thoughts or things we want to share about kind of label legibility, readability, uh, putting them together, anything like that? All right. Yeah, so I want to move on next to kind of, again, this is where maybe we have a little bit more practical information and sharing about how we actually make labels and panels in our exhibits. And I just wanted to put out there a few things to sort of think about when you're trying to decide how and what to print and mount your labels or panels. Obviously, cost is always a big consideration for us. And within that goes to things like the length of time an exhibit is on view. So we might be more interested in something that both costs more and is a longer lasting type of label for an exhibit that's going to be up for a number of years versus one that's only going to be up for 3 or 4 months. Need or desire to integrate images and text. So we'll walk through a few options here so you can see how that works versus just kind of your regular printed out labels. And then exhibit location. So this is most important for exhibits that might be outside or have a component where they are not in a sort of more climate controlled or indoor space. So exhibits that you're taking to a town fair or community day, or that are outside your organization or your building. There's going to be different printing and mounting options you're going to want to look into for those. So what are some of the sort of general types of ways in which we can and have exhibit panels and labels these days, which is there's a plethora of them, which is wonderful, but can also be a little overwhelming. So one popular one is both vinyl lettering and banners. So you can see on the left, that's vinyl lettering directly on a wall. Um, there's pluses and minuses to that. I will say we have some folks, we've used some vinyl lettering on one type of wall that does not want to come off when it's been put up. And so that can be a bit of a pain. But it's something, this one you can see, I feel like it's art galleries and museums love vinyl lettering on their walls, seems to be. So it is an option for you to use. And then banners. This is a really popular one, and you can see this is what we would call sort of a pull-up or step-up banner. So it's when you kind of pull the thing up from the ground and then it stays upright. But they're great in a lot of ways because, again, you can integrate your text and images. They are transportable if you use the pop-ups. They can be done so that they can be outside. They're lightweight. You can also get ones that will just hang on a wall instead of being the pull-up banners. So that's another kind of good option these days for folks who are looking for especially again, exhibits that can move around more easily. So I've called this printed on substrate. And so there's a number of different types of what I call substrate or the material in which a label or panel is on. So you can see on the left, that's one of ours. We tend to print these days on a sort of a rigid plastic substrate. And again, it's very kind of, it's a little bit similar to the vinyl banners in that they print out this color kind of plastic thing and they stick it to the substrate. But you can use Gator board, foam core. There's a number of different plastics. We use a sign shop, SB Signs, who's in Williston, to print these out for them. But a lot of places will do this these days, um, and not the cheapest, but not the most expensive thing either. And then the one on the top right is just the very simple, like we printed this out on our regular laser or inkjet printer on a piece of cardstock or mounted on foam core. It's it's simple, it does the job. These days, again, you can print it relatively easily and inexpensive at home. And then the bottom one is one that I've never sort of used or seen before, but it is an option these days as an actual digital label. So this is one where they actually have the label on an iPad, and it has a QR code. And I think this might be easier for something where again you're switching out a piece on a regular basis, and you need to update the label, and you don't want to take it on and off the wall. You could just mount your iPad and have a digital label. This would also be something where again you could have multiple bits of information that people could access on the digital iPad that they could go further into beyond just reading the label. So this is kind of the real open-ended discussion piece of what types of labels and panels are you all using and how and where do you get them produced? And I guess when you're talking about what ones you use, kind of like the how and why you're using that would be great to share. So again, feel free to use the slide if you'd like to just put it in there, but you can also use the chat or you can raise your hand and feel free to let us know. Yep. So who's using foam board at Staples? Price is reasonable. Yeah, excellent. Foam board and vinyl stickers. Great.
Here's the chat for it. Yeah, how do I? Oh, you need to see
Right, put somewhere,
on chat.
you like right there?
Yeah, there. Chat. And you can. enter it.
Encore. Yep. Printed text and images. Does not hold up very well. Yes. So that's again that consideration of what climate do you have? Yep. Photo paper and mountain foam board for cost effective display. Yeah. So I think foam core, and that's what we use for our what you might call in an art museum tombstone labels. There's the specific label for an object or a group of objects that talks about like what the object is and the dates and like a couple of sentences of information. We mount those on a black foam core that we print. We print off and double stick it to that Spark. I don't know what Spark stands for either, Wiz, but that's fantastic. But yeah, so that things like foam core or cardstock are more tend to warp a bit more in especially slightly more humid situations. So over time may not look as good or may sort of bend uh, as they go along. Local pack and shop store or online. Yeah. Quality versus expense, right? Ooh, Scotch-Brite nail laminator, thermal, threefold. Acrylic frames, yep. Threefold foam core stand-up displays. Hollow core doors, yeah. Yep. So here's a question from Karina. Frames, using foam cord or framed labels, but the frames don't look fresh and engaging. Uh, Researching more modern options. So anybody have any ideas for sort of more modern ways to sort of frame or put together their labels that they like or that they've seen? Again, it doesn't even have to be what you do specifically. It can be something else you've seen at some other organization that you think looks great. Um, Frames are nice because you can switch things out. Again, easy, but yeah, maybe don't look quite as modern, I guess. Command strips. Yep. Yes, we mount the vast majority of these days of ours, again, small labels, foam core labels on using command strips. The Velcro ones, they're picture hanging ones. Again, they do have a shelf life, again, depending on um, the environment, that they will sometimes fail over time, especially in a humid environment, but they work great for short-term exhibits. Though I have a sign right now, it's in one of our galleries that has been up for 7 years and has not moved with command strips. So sometimes you never know. Rails and wires, yeah. I'm also big, especially if you have a space that you want to change around, using hanging systems so you don't have to put holes in the wall. My favorite thing to do, not put holes in the wall. Any other thoughts on sort of labels, printing, production, or questions? Right. All right. We'll move on sort of the exhibit. Yes, Susanna, thrift repurposed fun picture frames. So that's kind of a neat way. Instead of using kind of more traditional looking frames, you're talking about kind of more fun frames, crown molding, and see-through acrylic hangers. Yep, fishing line, bulldog clips. Wiz question about opinions about fonts, serif or sans serif. Anybody have any deep-seated opinions about which ones they like to use? Lindsay uses a clothesline model for certain parts of exhibits in the past, usually to hang multiple related images. Nobody's big serif or sans serif. Everybody's just like whatevs. Ellen's a serif. There you go.
Eileen,
Yes,
it's
Laura.
Laura from Waterbury. I often, regarding the font question, I
Yeah.
often like to use a mix of them.
Mm,
Often for the title, I like to use a sans serif font, and then for the body, use the font with the serif in it. And just to help people out with this, the difference between sans serif and serif. Serif is an example of serif is like Times Roman, and like you said, it has little curly edges on the edge of the font. And then sans serif is Latin for no serif. If that helps people remember the difference.
great. Thank you, Laura.
Is there any really research about the readability?
So there's a number of resources, and again, I'll share the link to the exhibit worksheet, especially related to accessibility. There are, um, and there's a lot of things like there's if you want to really get into it, there's a lot of different sort of pieces that go into kind of saying is something good readability or not, and it depends on font size, how far back, it is, like a whole bunch of things. So in I would say in a general sense, at smaller sizes, sans serif would tend to be a better choice, but there's so many factors that can go into it that you can get serif fonts that are just as readable as sans serif, depending on what you're doing. So this is the unfortunate thing. There's no like one correct answer for which one to use. Some of it is finding the ones that you like, and this is another thing where you can ask, like do that same sort of like label choice exercise with a bunch of folks and see, if people have issues or not with something. But I would say, pick one of each that you like and you feel comfortable using, and use it. So size font is recommended for inside the case and on a wall. So again, that will depend a little bit on how far away that is from a viewer. And I think I have another slide. I don't know if it's the next slide. Let me see.
So you're suggesting that we should sort of have the way we do it, that don't have a bunch of different fonts and a bunch of different exhibits, have our sort of own brand for these are the fonts that we use.
One way I think of simplifying it, and I think especially when you're talking about the main sort of reading content. So not talking about like titles or bigger text or text that's really about the the exhibit itself, but more about the literal reading pieces that you want people to do. I think, sort of choosing something and having it be kind of standardized can help. It can help folks certainly within an exhibit, and sometimes it can help folks within a gallery as well. Yeah. So definitely look again at the worksheet. There's a couple of different, especially accessibility resources that I shared on there, related to font sizes, types, spacing, all that stuff that you can get into and figure out what's the best for what you need, what you should be doing. But again, and a lot of it is also sometimes like finding folks with some different sort of abilities to read stuff and asking them, can you read this? Or, oh, is this easy to read or not? So that sort of gets us in a little bit. I'm going to switch over to design a little bit as well to keep talking about some of these pieces. And so design is again the literal way that you put together or the look of the exhibit. And a couple of things just to sort of note. Again, planning the flow of your exhibit is an important piece that helps people uh, to look at it in the way that you want them to, or move through it in the way that you want them to. But I think also understanding that not everybody follows directions in the same way or ever goes the same direction. So, do what you can to help, but you will have folks who come in the middle or go clockwise instead of counterclockwise, kind of no matter what you do. So be thinking about that as you design, and think about where and how you have content. Again, designing for everyone, accessibility is kind of the key here. And again, some of those standards and information pieces that I put on the exhibit worksheet, I think are really helpful in sort of looking at some of that information. And then the other piece of kind of layering content and information in your design. So again, that it's not about putting everything out right in front of people all in the same place, but you could layer content again using things that you might see. Um, Again, is using technology or QR codes, using things that are, like an additional binder of information that people can look through or not look through, if you don't have an iPad to use. Sometimes it can actually just be like putting a wall kind of in the way so that people aren't having to like visually look at everything in the exhibit in one area. So that they have to they're only seeing one piece at a time, and that becomes less overwhelming as well. Oh, so here we go. So this is one of the standards. This is in the Museum of Human Rights in Canada. They have, again, great accessibility resources that are on their website. But this is kind of one view of how you can kind of put labels or have labels on a wall that is accessible. And again, if you go to the website, you'll actually be able to read what these numbers are. There are, of course, also centimeters, so you have to convert if you're can't convert in your head like I cannot. It's to sort of feet and inches. But sort of gives you an idea about where your primary text should be at, thinking about titles, bigger pieces that could be above that, and then also kind of how you don't want to get too much lower than that. And this is a very general one piece of that accessibility.
You leave this out?
And there's something that you'll also see on the worksheet, but it's called universal design. And this is this idea, it goes beyond museums, but that when we're designing with accessibility in mind and keeping things kind of to some of these standards to make them as accessible to the most number of people as possible. And it can get into things like if you don't just have things straight on the wall, if you have things on sort of tilted panels or something like that, what are those heights? How much wheelchair space you need between things? All of those kind of considerations for your design pieces that can feel overwhelming, but that once you kind of get in the zone, I think you can really figure out, again, how do you standardize your own exhibits in your own space and figure that out. All right. So again, another open-ended question, or again, a chance for folks to talk about anything about exhibit design or accessibility that we want to keep talking about. But just sort of a question about examples of great exhibit design you've seen and kind of why you liked it. Because I always think it's kind of nice to think about, was it the way in which they had the panels? Was it the colors? Was it the layout? Uh, Anything that you really liked?
House with different rooms, so that there's only water there, the house with different rooms and theme. With instead of you don't have to chat, but yeah,
No exhibit design.
there's our chat. You go, write it.
Even if it's not design specific, any exhibits you've seen recently that you liked and kind of why you liked it. Yeah. Oh, Seeking Freedom exhibit. Yes. Yeah, if you haven't gone to see that, I would highly recommend it. And so this is composition, artifact displays, and interior building use of walls to create spaces and niches within the exhibit. Yeah. That's a neat one. That's a great, again, use of color to differentiate spaces, lighting, um, a lot of really neat ways to organize it and be powerful in some spots, really powerful. Anything else? Great exhibits.
Yeah. That would come up.
Wonderful. So, yep, note about Hall Art Foundation, which is I guess in the southern part of the state, I believe, right? They don't use labels at all, but are instead providing benches and binders with the information, right? So a way in which to not overwhelm people. American Precision's big panels of lithographs and maps and mills. Nice. Yeah, so lots of big visuals. That's great.
Yeah, those are big buildings.
For Freedom exhibit had a nice blend of artwork and text. Yes, Bill. Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is another thing, again, we're history, mostly history organizations, but that doesn't mean that art and visual is not an important component of what we are doing as well. The focus is on the object or the artifact. The label should not outshine it. No over designing. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a trap that we can sometimes get into, that we think something needs to look shiny and fancy, and we forget that we can keep it simple. And again, the focus is on, right, the story, not necessarily color. Yes, on exhibit about the daily lives of African Americans in colonial Boston at Faneuil Hall, pull-up banners. Yep. There's a walk through a story with text and images that was very compelling. Nice.
Over Christmas, I went to New York and saw the 9/11 Memorial and also the Tenement Museum. And in this conversation, it occurs to me that they were very focused on what their story was. What story were they trying to tell? None of us is going to get near doing the job that they did, but I think that's a critical piece that I frequently lose track of.
Yep. Great. Great point, Wiz. Yeah. I think again that remembering that all these pieces play together. And that I think right, that again the story, the artifact, the object, the pieces, the content um should be, the essential piece. And then the design, and the practicality of mounting the exhibit is how you sort of make that more compelling or interesting or readable for everybody. All right. So those kind of the slides and information that I have. So we've got a little bit more time to just open it up to any other kind of thoughts or questions as it relates to exhibits, labels, panels, design, anything we've talked about or haven't talked about that you guys wanted to today. I know there was one question on one of the other slides about foam core warping and how to stop that. Um, it's not easy to do. So I don't know if anybody has any top tricks on that one. Uh, yeah, blank slate, building a new museum space. Fantastic. Right? That's great fun.
Put your cursor up there. You can change.
Information and resources about the step up banners. So does anybody have any great uh, places where they have got or they get step up banners? I could tell you where we get or we have gotten ours. There's a number of different places online. One of the big places we go to for a lot of our materials um, is called Displays to Go, and the two is a number. Displays to Go. They do like exhibit and trade show booth stuff mainly, but so they have everything And so that you can buy the pull-up banners and have them printed by them as well. We also have gotten them printed. Again, our place that we use in Williston is SB Signs. They're a great print shop. Um, I think that's a great thing to find your local, hopefully, print shop that maybe is really good at doing these kinds of projects and hopefully has at least their own in-house designer to help you at that. I don't know if anybody has any other places that they've used for step-up banners, um, or the substrates Vistaprint for something similar. We haven't used Vistaprint, I don't think. We've used, I know, one website called something like vinylbanners.com or something like that, like one of those places for some really big vinyl banners that we had printed. Not the ones that had quite the detail for the smaller ones, but really super big ones that weren't quite as detailed. Um, I like this great thought about juxtaposition is a great way to exhibit unlikely items, show how they relate. That's fantastic. Ooh. Oh, that's a great question. Suggestions on people who can create 3D models, particularly bird's eye view landscapes, to help visitors make geographic connections. Anybody out there know who makes 3D models, had 3D models made? I don't think we have.
So after the, oh, no, I don't know why that happened. I don't know why that's gone. Oh, John, do you see this way down here? Yeah, the send. Send right there. See if it goes.
One suggests not doing is a question from Stowe. Oh, Bill, great suggestion for 3D models considering model railroad clubs. Ooh, that's a great idea. Oh, Ellen's seconding model train, folks. I like it. That's a fantastic idea. Question from Sue about large poster board displays where photos are fixed, and appropriate tapes and adhesives to use, and backings to help photos or news articles pop more. Ooh, any great ideas for that, folks?
Oh, no. So it's shadow at the top. I think, wow. We gotta take them on and fold it out.
Right, and another question on there about overlay maps, like original road maps over a see-through layer. Anybody done any of that kind of thing? Bill noting that they have a 3D printer to build a model of Main Street buildings, need some expertise to do. Yep. Yeah, and there are some certainly around like schools and maker spaces that have 3D printers. That could be another place that you could uh, sort of think about working with on creating a 3D model of something. Great. Susanna's used scrapbook paper, textured sometimes to back photos. Nice. David talking about billings using layers, artifacts, and drawers that people can open so they can have more information. Tracy uses Loctite mounting putty to adhere laminated items to display boards. And I will say that, like, when you're talking especially about labels and panels and things that are not originals, uh, there's so many more options. Like, you don't have to think necessarily about using archival stuff if it's just a printed out label or a copy of a photograph or any of that kind of stuff. So um, definitely feel free to use something that's maybe got a little bit more adhering to something like that than you might use on anywhere near or on your artifacts. Tracy says color copying most of the photos, even if they're black and white. Yep. And Laura's sort of talking about Pat's new exhibit space in Bell's in Brattleboro, engaging a graphic designer worth the initial investment and standards and guidelines. So that is a good, again, this comes back to that sort of how do you pick or choose what you do, and things like cost can go along with how long something is going to be up or how important, quote unquote, something is. And I think that's a great point to think about, when do investments pay off? And that could be by getting you, a really tight set of standards and guidelines and maybe flow that you can then use in later years and keep going with. Oh, question about colorizing. So not printing in color, but colorizing black and white photos. Any ethical issues, as long as it's noted? Good question. Anybody use color photos or colorization processes?
I would think as long as you indicate what you've done, so that the viewer doesn't think that this beautiful 1910 whatever is original in color, you're okay ethically.
Bellows Falls. I did have it right, Pat. I was going to say Bellows Falls, and then I went to Brattleboro. I don't know why. Any other thoughts, questions?
Okay, would you go to participants and click on? Like, we can't see them. Okay, never mind. Well, maybe if we put away. No, it would be across the top. You can close that, but I don't then go to gallery.
All right.
Where's gallery?
Okay. Well, for good for the day, I won't hold anybody on here any longer. But again, we're going to be doing our last roundtable in March on the, let me just double check myself, 17th, I believe. Yep, 17th, and we'll be talking about education and interactives. And again, we'll have this, I'll be sending out the recording of this to everybody who registered. And again, also we'll have the link again to the exhibit worksheet from this. And if there's any comments, thoughts, or questions that come up afterwards, feel free to let me know. Bill's sort of talking about 6 months or less for foam core. I think that's a great note. Foam core is great for short, small things. Awesome. Well, thank you guys again for coming. And we will look forward to seeing you in March when hopefully there will be less snow on the ground. That's all I'm going to say about that. Thanks, everybody. Take care.